Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, after recently learning about a company called HarperDB and how their technology is not only transforming their own business, but also transforming other businesses in unique and innovative ways, I felt compelled to find out more and especially dig deeper on the story behind the company. So I invited their CEO, Stephen Goldberg, onto the podcast. Now, Stephen has worked as a CTO and CEO of startups. He's held several roles at larger organizations like Red Hat and has also led digital transformation projects at a number of Fortune 500 companies across multiple verticals. And not only that, he's also an established thought leader in the IoT space, having been published on sites such as TechTarget and quoted in a number of articles and publications such as Forbes, and even been a speaker at IoT World, SAP Sapphire and Salesforce.com's Dreamforce. And if all that isn't enough, he even holds 2 patents with Kyle and Zach. So I think what I'm trying to say here is he knows his stuff. But I want to learn more about his story, how he got into tech, and also where HarperDB is heading in the future. That's the plan for today, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Denver, Colorado, where Stephen is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
My name is Stephen Goldberg. I'm one of the co-founders of HarperDB, and I'm the CEO. HarperDB is an edge data management development platform that is globally distributed and focused on solving low latency use cases while helping developers to thrive by making their lives super easy and being the easiest development and data management platform in the world.
And a question I always like to ask my guests is a little bit more about their origin story. What put you on this path? Where did your passion for tech come from, and what lit that spark in you? Can you remember what it was and the moment that put you on this path?
Yeah, it's a long story that begins 31 years ago. But so, when I was 7, my dad bought a computer. And I'm old enough that was quite a novelty. And he put it in a room in our basement. And he said, "Hey, you should play with this." And my father was not super technical. In fact, when he was in college, his brother went on to study computer science and he became a doctor. And he said to his brother, and this was in the early 70s, "This computer programming thing's not going anywhere." And that story becomes funnier later. But my dad, he didn't really know how to use it. My mom didn't either. And I just kind of banged on the thing and played with it. And then, I tried tearing the software layer, tearing it to pieces and trying to find every in and out. And there was no internet. And I was 7 years old. So, just kind of diving into it. And then at my school, there was no IT department. And so a few of my friends and I, who were sort of very geeky, were kind of the de facto IT department. They would actually even pull us out of class if a computer broke and take us to a teacher's office or an administrator's office and help fix their computer. And we'd fix all the broken computers and have all the spare parts to play with. And then they built us a lab, and I kind of got into it that way. And, we'd do stupid things like one time in the library for fun, we tried plugging in 2 different computer power supplies into each other to see what happened. And that resulted in kind of an explosion, which was kind of comical. But then my uncle, who I mentioned previously, had moved out to California and had founded a software company called HurlNet, which was an ISP billing software company. And my parents thought it'd be a good idea if I went out and spent some time with him. And he had this company in his garage, but he'd converted the garage into like a real work office. And he had like 20 or 30 people working there. And these were all like the hardcore folks who created the internet. And they just sat me down at 13 and started throwing tutorials at me and teaching me stuff. And I was, on a Unix-based computer, learning Unix terminal commands and learning HTML and programming. And Then many years later, like throughout high school and college, I kind of developed websites and stuff like that. And many years later, I went to college and I graduated during the last recession. And I had planned to do something entirely different, but I couldn't really find a job. And again, my father called a friend and said, "Hey, my son can program. Do you have anything at your company?" And this was in like 2008, and I had applied for hundreds of jobs and not gotten a single call back, or I had very awkward interviews. And I ended up doing some work there, and they then implemented Salesforce.com, and they were like, "Hey, we just bought this. Do you mind figuring it out?" And I then implemented for the entire company by myself in my very early 20s. And then Red Hat called me and said, "Hey, that's pretty impressive. Do you want to come work for us?" And then from there, I worked at Red Hat. I did consulting. I started my own consulting company. That company was acqui-hired into a company in the Bay Area. And then along the way, I met Kyle Bernhardy, who's my co-founder, and he and I started my first company together. We then met Fred Yoon, who was our first customer, and then we got acqui-hired by his company, and he's our other co-founder. Jason Bosonic, who's our head of sales, he's actually the reason I moved to Denver, because he recruited me from Red Hat. And I just sort of collected a bunch of misfit toys. And our last company, we were the sort of engineering team, and we had a lot of struggles, real-time streaming analytics and real-time decision-making, and scaled out large data architectures. We had just this Frankenstein pipeline of data. It was very hard to use, and it was very expensive. And we just sort of felt like there had to be a better way to solve that problem. And we saw that people were building all these very specialized tools to solve one problem. And that to us seemed kind of crazy, because then that meant you as a developer had to figure out, like, do I use Hadoop for this use case? Do I use Mongo? Do I use this? Do I use this? And it was really placing the complexity back on the developer. And that frustrated Kyle and I, because if you think about like an iPhone, it's an extremely technologically complex device, but what it presents to the world is a really simple interface to use that a child can understand. And so Apple has internalized that complexity for their customer and made it simple and easy to use. And it's extremely powerful, but you don't have to have a degree in computer science from Stanford to figure out how to use an iPhone. And Kyle and I sort of took that philosophy and felt like we could build a data management and development platform that was similar, and that while super complex internally and could massively scale and support many different use cases, would just present a really easy to use interface that any developer of any skill level could figure out. And that's what we set out to launch. And that's kind of what we built, and then found some other areas where we're pretty good at along the way. And we've also hired a bunch of other folks and built a team that I'm incredibly proud of. And that's how I'm here. I apologize. That was kind of a long answer. I guess I'm in a really narrative mood today.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. And the reason that I asked that question is, I think from the outside looking in, you're the successful CEO at the top of the mountain. And we celebrate this all too often, but we don't celebrate the climb to the top of that mountain and what formed you, what shaped you, the people that invested in you and getting where you are now. And it's so important to hear that, especially for people that are at the very beginning of their career and maybe struggling a little bit, and they'll take something from your story today. And I'm curious, from your time at Red Hat, were there any big takeaways there? Any funny stories or big lessons learned along the way there?
Yeah, I mean, I learned more at Red Hat, which was more than 10 years ago now, than I learned anywhere else. It was the best company I ever worked at. And I also left 1 month before I vested a lot of my shares. So one of the big takeaways was stay a little longer, because I would have made 10 million if I had stayed. I still consider a bunch of the folks I worked with some of my close friends, and they're amazing people. I learned so much there. So, one, I learned about culture and what a great company should look like. I learned also some things not to do. Red Hat scaled really fast, and they had some challenges around that and made some mistakes. I feel like I was there sort of when Red Hat was 2,000 people. And so that, I wasn't there from the earliest days, but I was there sort of at an inflection point. I learned, how to solve problems. I learned also just Charlie Peters, who was the CFO there, he kind of drove the company on one metric, which was revenue per employee, which sounds really geeky and sort of Wall Street focused. And I'm not a finance person. For the most part, I could care less about finance or KPIs or stuff like that. But that was informative to me, because what he was really saying is like, in a lot of ways that boils down to have a great team that can do a lot with less. And the reason, and I'm not trying to overwork my employees, I care deeply about them, but what I've found is that really good folks would rather work on a small team of other really good folks than work on a large team of folks who maybe aren't as contributing as much as them. And so that's kind of something we've adopted. Like, we're not hiring 100 people just to say we did. We didn't raise massive amounts of money just to say we can. We prefer to just do really good work with the people that we have and support them. And that I learned that there also. I also learned that white T-shirts, which Red Hat was very fond of at the time, make people look dorky. And so we primarily give out black T-shirts. And I was arrogant, and thought I knew everything. And I had a really great boss, Sarah Wang, there, who sort of beat me into shape in a loving way and taught me a tremendous amount. And I learned humility to a certain extent, but that lesson took a decade to set in from what she taught me. But I learned that being humble is very important, and you get a lot more done while listening to other folks.
100% with you there. Although I am shifting uncomfortably in my chair here, wearing a white T-shirt as I talk to you today. But
at least we're not on camera. No, we like the uniform at Red Hat was huge white Red Hat T-shirts with cargo shorts and Birkenstocks. And I look back at pictures of myself then, or think about it, and it was not the best.
We'll have to go on Google Images to try and find one of those. But of course, it was that path that led you to HarperDB, which does have a reputation as being the fastest and most flexible database on the market. But for people that are hearing about you for the first time, can you offer a bit of an overview of the kind of problems that you're solving for your customers?
Yeah, so it's kind of two different things. For your everyday developer, like, it's when you want to start coding, it's really hard to, like, you got to figure out your database, you got to figure out your schema, you got to figure out where you're going to deploy your software, you got to figure out like your back end, your front end, and there's all these components. And what we're really focused on is just collapsing the stack. And so with HarperDB, you can build your entire back-end, front-end, machine learning AI all in one place with a built-in database and deploy it. And it's super easy to use, and you can write it in any language you want, primarily focused on Python and Node, but you can use any language you want. And what the problem for them really trying to solve is, I am a developer, Kyle's a developer, Jackson, our head of products, developer. When I start a new application, I just want to code. I don't want to think about all those things. I just want to start writing code. And so for those folks, that's what HarperDB does. You don't have to worry about anything. All of that is solved by us, and you just start writing your code. And that's great for the developer world. And we have 70,000 developers using HarperDB. But then for the large enterprise, we're solving a very different problem, which we didn't mean to solve and was sort of a happy accident. But in gaming and media and sort of large scale globally distributed applications or geo-distributed applications, one of the challenges that we've seen is that no matter how much you distribute your application, whether that's on Kubernetes or Docker and containers, ultimately your application calls back to a centralized database. Maybe that's DynamoDB on US West 2, maybe that's Firebase, maybe that's a huge Mongo instance. And that creates global latency, because if you're trying to reach a user in Buenos Aires, you may have deployed your application somewhere near Buenos Aires, but that application, that API is still going to call all the way back to Oregon, maybe. And that's a physics problem, and you're fighting the speed of light. And that introduces a lot of global latency. And so for us, what we do is we globally distribute that data in less than 100 milliseconds. And we're also faster at an individual node level, which means we significantly reduce people's query times and make your applications way faster. And so what that does is it allows, for a better customer experience, it allows, people to capture more data at a higher rate. It allows for better user interactions, and it significantly drives down costs, because it's super expensive to pay those egress costs in hyperscaler clouds. And then you also need more and more servers for, EC2, et cetera. And so that's kind of the problem we're solving there. And if you think about it, what our goal is for that first developer who's writing their application, someday they're going to be that huge globally successful company. You can start writing your code on HarperDB, and you don't have to start over at your Series A, your Series B with a whole new infrastructure. You can start with HarperDB. It's super easy to use. You'll get up and running way faster than any other platform. And someday you'll be a Fortune 500 with 150 million users, and we'll still be able to support you. And that's kind of the journey that we're trying to solve. And that's the solution that we built.
And you mentioned machine learning, artificial intelligence there, and other emerging trends, of course, around Web3, the journey there, and decentralization.
100%.
Can you expand on what that means for data storage and what you guys do too?
Yeah. So like you can, using TensorFlow or Python, write machine learning algorithms right on HarperDB. So one of our customers, Edison Interactive, for example, has written a bunch of machine learning to do personalized content experiences, personalized like retraining models in real time during, customer experiences, and some really cool stuff there. And so, the cool thing about that is if you think about it, it's great to do that in the cloud. But when you start talking about real world applications of AI and machine learning, having that as close to the end user as possible is sort of mission critical. You don't want to be waiting 30 seconds to retrain an ML model or to get a result from one when a user is waiting. And so by distributing those learnings through HarperDB and the actual AI ML anywhere in the world, you make that customer experience better. But also by having it built in the same database where you're doing your operational data store, where you're building your API, where maybe even you're building your front end, it just makes everything a lot more seamless, and it gives you a wealth of data to train on. When it comes to sort of Web3 and blockchain, these technologies are really exciting and they have a lot of promise, but they still ultimately are going to end up needing to interact with a traditional database. Even when we start to see quantum computing and things like that, you still need a traditional database. But a centralized paradigm, most of our competitors, the way they've solved these problems is they just throw more compute at it. There's a really large, really successful database company that takes its name after a act of nature. And, they're offering, the way they solve it is they just add more and more compute. And the problem with that is in a decentralized world, in a Web3 world, really, you need data to be as close to the end user as possible. And so what that means is you need to more efficiently use compute. You need to be able to run on something like a Raspberry Pi Zero or a mobile device or a gaming console or a point of sale system. And that's what HarperDB can do while also running on cloud and all these other places.
And I'm conscious we've covered a lot of technology and a lot of emerging technologies. I'm not sure if you might not be able to mention any names, but are there any use cases or client stories that you can share that would just bring to life everything that we're talking about here and help listeners understand how this kind of thing could work in their world too?
Yeah, so the customer I just mentioned, Edison Interactive, they're a Verizon partner, and they have a solution called the Shark Experience, which is essentially in golf carts, 33,000 golf carts across the United States. They have, these in-golf cart tablet experiences for what's my yardage, ordering food, watching sports scores, listening to radio. And those golf carts are distributed across the United States. They're all on the Verizon 5G network. And they all did call back to a centralized database. And that created up to 5 seconds of latency for that experience. That sounds not that horrible, but think about it. If you want to click a button and order your food and it takes 5 seconds, the human brain, that's a long time. And it also costs them a lot of money over time. So with HarperDB, within a few weeks, we're able to migrate them to our solution, migrate their APIs to HarperDB, and we're able to drive down their API latency to 10 to 20 milliseconds. And so what that means is for the end customers trying to order their food, trying to see their yardage, trying to watch a video, that experience now in that golf cart is 10 to 20 milliseconds. And so that hugely improves customer satisfaction. It hugely reduces their costs. And then also they are able to do AI and ML. So if you think about things like in the future, they'll be releasing, smart caddy experience or, interacting with a voice AI in that platform. None of that would really be possible in a golf cart because the other challenge is the compute that you have on the golf cart, it's not powerful enough. That device, it can't do those things. It can't make all these data decisions. It can't power AI ML. But through having a database distributed, and we're in every location that Verizon is in, right near that golf course, it's as if you've enhanced the amount of compute that's on that golf cart. So you now have a data center running on that golf cart, essentially, is what that feels like. And so that opens up a world of possibilities. And if you think about that for in-room entertainment in hotels, if you think about that for, vehicles, manufacturing, military use cases, gaming console use cases, mobile applications, we're doing things like that with lots of different companies. And it's pretty exciting, all the different possibilities that opens up.
It really is. And you guys have also had an incredibly exciting year. I was reading, or I learned before we started recording today, about the growing number of partnerships and how you're scaling there. Is that something you can expand on too for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we spent a long time trying to find our place in the world, I guess I would say. We tried stuff in IoT on little devices and mining operations, and we wandered the wilderness, I like to say. But in the last year, through partnerships with companies like Akamai and Verizon and Equinix and Google and others, we have really found our sweet spot, many of the things I just mentioned. It's been a fun time for us because we kind of went from zero revenue to cash flow positive in 1 year. We did 6.2 million in sales in Q1. We've built amazing partnerships with a lot of telecom companies. We've grown our team on revenues, which has been super cool and very different than the most startups in this climate, and we're cash flow positive for the foreseeable future. And it's been really fun. We grew our team from 13 people to 20 in 1 quarter, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's over 50% increase, which has been awesome. We've hired a lot of great people. We've also had some very unique challenges in doing that, but it's been the most fun time for me at HarperDB in the 5.5 years we've been doing this.
Fantastic. And are there any tech trends or anything that particularly excites you at the moment that you're following very closely? We mentioned Web3 a minute ago. I think that's something everyone's excited about. But is there anything that you'd like to expand on there?
To be honest, I used to get excited about tech trends.
Yeah.
And we were so ahead of our time. I'm less interested in tech trends now. I still obviously stay on top of most things. And, one of the things I'm looking at right now is quantum internet and how that will impact HarperDB's business. And that's something that we probably need to be prepared for, and something I am excited about down the road. And we are doing some really interesting things with AI, which I'm not ready to talk about yet, and that we'll release in the future. But nowadays, I'm more focused on what is the market actually finally adopting? We've always been, for our whole career, so good at staying ahead of everybody else from an innovation perspective. The thing we've been really bad at, and almost cost us HarperDB, is realizing, what are people ready for today? What's actually happening in today's world? And so one of the things I've been training myself to do over the last few years is take a closer look at what is the appetite today for change. And I think what we're seeing now is people are realizing that the edge is real, that it is just this sort of extension of the cloud, that distributed application architectures utilizing the edge are not a huge lift from their existing cloud paradigms. It doesn't have to be tremendously disruptive, but that you can get huge benefits from that. And that's kind of what I'm focused on today.
And looking to the future, you almost gave us a little teaser a minute ago, so I won't go any further on that. But where do you go from here? What's next for you guys?
I think over the next couple of years, we're going to invest a lot of time and money in the HarperDB service layer. So HarperDB as a product is awesome. We're about to release HarperDB 4.0, which will radically change how we do clustering, replication, how external things can connect to the HarperDB platform. And I'm very excited about that. But where we need to invest is really in building out HarperDB as a service more, being on more places, having more features around our service, giving developers even more benefits around how they deploy their solutions, how they are supported by us. And that's kind of what we're going to focus on for the next 18 to 24 months. I'll also say, because my background is large scale enterprise, that I've focused a lot on that customer, but we have a solution that developers love. And so we're going to spend a lot of time over the next 18 to 24 months focusing on the, developers. And I'm really excited about that.
Well, we started the podcast today talking about your origin story, but now we've come full circle. I'm going to throw a slight curveball in your direction. And so I always ask the guests to leave everyone listening with a personal note of inspiration. And by that, I mean, is that a book that has inspired you that we can add to our Amazon wish list, or just a favourite song that gets you your head in the zone when you're coding or something that we can add to our Spotify playlist? Is there anything you'd like to leave us with there?
Sure. Two things pop to mind. Snow Crash and Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson are probably, and everything William Gibson wrote. Yeah, they're like, it's sort of like the playbook for the future. So if you want to know what's going to happen, just read Neil Stephenson and William Gibson and filter out William Gibson stuff around fax machines. And then, for music, I'm obsessed with Florence and the Machine, and people make fun of me because it's pretty much when I'm working, one of the only things I listen to. But I those are kind of that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. So if you were to choose one Florence and the Machine song to add to the playlist, what would you go with?
I can't do that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I won't push you on that.
Yeah, I can't, because it depends on the mood I'm in. Sometimes, but they are my favorite.
Awesome. Well, I'll add the books to the Amazon wish list. I might choose a Florence Machine song for you. But before I let you go, can I just ask you to tell the listeners where they can find out more information about HarperDB? Maybe they want to contact your team or connect with you. What's the best starting point?
If you want to contact us, we have a community Slack. You can jump on that and join, and our entire team is accessible via that and is very responsive. If you want to learn more about us, you can go to our website. You can follow us on Twitter. Those are probably the best places, but I highly encourage people to jump in the Slack, because the level of access that you get to Kyle, our CTO, Jackson Rapper, head of product, Margot, who runs developer relations, is incredible. And we really pride ourselves on being very interactive there.
Well, I'll add those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easy. I love chatting with you today. I think one of the big takeaways there that you said a few moments ago is about not getting obsessed with the future and the next big thing, but more about what are people ready to adopt and embrace today, right now. And I think that's such an important reminder, and also, more than anything, for taking the time to share your origin story with me and put a bit of heart and soul behind HarperDB too. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Neil. That was great, and I really enjoyed it.
A huge thank you to Stephen for coming on the podcast, and I'll share a little story with you here. Because I had last-minute invites to attend various tech conferences, I had to reschedule today's podcast interview, not once, but twice, and that's something that I hate doing. I hate being late for anything. I hate rescheduling and just letting anybody down, and thankfully, Stephen was incredibly patient throughout the whole process, as was his team. And so I thank them all for being so patient, understanding, and no tables were tossed in the process. So I think not only have we ended up with a great interview with this, I just want to thank him and everyone that organised today's interview for ensuring it did happen and we got that value out there. And over to you. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that are inspired by Stephen's story. Maybe you've got a similar story yourself that you'd like to share. I'd love to get you on here because, as I said at the very beginning of the podcast, after listening to Stephen's story, we concentrate on that big successful job role. We always focus on the success, and that person stood at the top of the mountain, but it's that climb to the summit. That's where the magic happens. That's what I love hearing about. That's what I love celebrating. So I'd love to hear your stories, your insights, whatever it might be. If you've got questions or if you want to come on, just email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn @Neil C. Hughes. We'll keep this conversation going. But as you know, today we've just talked about a software company focusing on making data management easy. But what does that mean we can talk about tomorrow? Because I want to go down a completely different route. And for that, I'm going to spin the wheel of fortune that will determine tomorrow's topics. I'm going to spin it now. Where it stops, that will reveal what we're going to talk about tomorrow. To find out where it stopped, well, I'm afraid you're going to have to join me again tomorrow, where I will be mooching in your podcast feed, where we'll do it all again. So a big thank you to Stephen for joining me today. An even bigger thank you to each and every one of you for tuning into this podcast. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.